In section 4.3, we're going to talk about congruent triangles. And congruent is a word you've heard before. We've talked about angles being congruent in chapter 1, like vertical angles are always congruent. We've talked about sides being congruent, so when we have a segment that's broken into parts, we say the two halves are congruent. In the last chapter, we talked about parallel lines and transversals and how alternate interior angles are congruent. So that's a word you should be used to. So in this section, we're going to talk about how triangles can be congruent. And when triangles are congruent, or even any figure other than a triangle, could be even like a square or a trapezoid. But when figures are congruent, they have exactly the same size and shape. And so we use this word corresponding to talk about how the sides and the angles will match up. So the corresponding sides will be the two sides in the individual triangles that have the same measurement. And the corresponding angles will be the two angles that have the same measurement in each triangle. And we're going to focus on triangles. We're not going to do shapes that are not triangles in this section. We'll just stick with triangles. So we want to talk about this word congruent statement. A congruent statement indicates which sides and angles are congruent. So if we come down here and look at this spot here where they say triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF, that is actually called a congruence statement. This is what we mean by a congruence statement. And what's really important about a congruence statement is that the order they are writing the letters is trying to tell you which sides have the same measure in both triangles and which angles have the same measure. So notice how in the first triangle there's an A, a B, and a C, and in the second triangle there's a D, an E, and an F. Because they wrote them in that order, they wrote the A first, and in the second triangle they wrote the D first. That means angles A and D will be congruent. And see how they mark them with the same marking even. They put single markings on the A and the D. Because the B is in the middle and the E is in the middle, that means they were trying to tell you that angle B would have the same measurement as angle E. And then again, if you notice in the picture, they both have double arc marks on them. And then finally, because C was written last and F was written last, they're trying to tell you that angle C would have the same measurement as angle F. And you can see in the picture they gave them both triple markings. And so the order they write the letters in is trying to tell you how they match up, who's congruent to who, which angle has the same measure in one triangle versus the other triangle. The same is true of the sides. The sides are also written in a certain order, right? Sides are always two letters at a time. So if we focus on the first triangle and look at side AB, I'm going to highlight that now. Side AB, the letters A and B were written in the first two positions. So let me number these, 1, 2, 3. And in the other one, let me label the letters 1, 2, and 3. So because the A and the B were written first, and in the second triangle, they wrote the D and the E first. If we go over the corresponding sides, that means those are congruent to each other. If you took a ruler out and measured them, they would be the same. And notice how they both have single tick marks on them. So if we look in the other triangle, DE also has a single tick mark on it. As we move over and look at the next two positions, notice the B has is the second letter they wrote, and the C is the third letter. In the second triangle, they wrote E second and F third. So because they're both in the second and third position, that means BC is congruent to EF. And then finally, the first and third position, A and C are in the first and third position, and so are D and F. And so we would write those and say that they are congruent to each other. And again, if you match it up to the tick marks in the triangle, on the first set of sides, this first set here, they had single tick marks. The second set of side had double tick marks. And the third set of sides, they put triple tick marks on because they were trying to mark which side goes with which side. All right, so again, the important thing to know about a congruent statement is the order they're writing the letters in is exactly how you can figure out which side goes with which side and which angle goes with which angle. And those are called, again, that word corresponding. When I say which goes with which, that means those are considered corresponding parts. So if we go down to example 1, it says write a congruent statement for the triangles below. So what they want you to say is the first triangle is congruent to the second triangle, but they want you to write the letters in the right order. And so the way I think it's easiest to get the order correct is you pick the first triangle and you travel from letter to letter to letter. And I always like to go across the tick marks from first to second to third. So notice we have a single tick mark here. So if I go from G to F, I crossed over that single tick mark. Why did I say F? I'm sorry, G to H, I crossed over that single tick mark. If you keep going, there's a set of double tick marks. So if you go from H to I, you went across the double tick mark. So that's how I'm going to write the first triangle. I'm going to write it as G, H, I. When I write the second triangle, I have to travel over the tick marks the exact same way. I have to go over the single tick mark and then the double. So if I go from C to D to E, I did that exact same thing. I went across the single and then the double. So C to D to E will accomplish that. And now I know I have all the parts matched up correctly. The next thing it's asking me to do is list the corresponding angles. Which angle is congruent to which angle in each triangle? And you can do that two ways. You can either look at your congruent statement and say, well, I wrote angle G first, so it must be congruent to the first letter I wrote in the second triangle. I wrote angle C first. Or you could go by the picture. If you go by the picture, you're just going to look at which angle has the same marking as angle G. G and C have the same marking, so they belong together. They're what's called corresponding angles. Keep doing that with the angles. So H belongs with D. Again, if you look at the congruent statement, it's because they're both in the second spot. Or if you go to the picture, it's because they both have double arc marks on them. And then finally, I belongs with E. They both have triple arc marks on them in the picture, and they were both written in the third position. You also need to be able to list the corresponding sides. So again, you can go to the picture or you can go to your congruent statement. Most people do prefer the picture if a picture is given, so let's do it from the picture. So we're going to say in the picture, we look at the single tick mark, that's on side GH. So I know that GH, side GH, is going to be congruent to, go to the other triangle and find the single tick mark. It's up here, right? There's the other single tick mark. So GH must be congruent to CD. And remember from chapter 1 that if you called it HG or DC and switched those letters, that's fine. We can switch the letters that we learned in chapter 1. All right, if we continue and find the ones with the double tick marks, that would be this side here I'm highlighting in purple, right? That has a double tick mark on it, and that side HI. So HI is going to be congruent to, go to the other triangle and say, where's the double tick mark? Right here on side DE. So DE and HI are congruent. And then finally, the one that has the third tick mark is that remaining side that I'll highlight in green. It is GI or IG. It doesn't matter. You can switch the letters if you want, but I'm going to put GI, and that because that has 3 tick marks on it. And if you go to the other side with 3 tick marks, that has CE. So GI and CE will be congruent to each other. Okay? So you could have gone by the congruent statement, or you could have gone by the picture, and the picture usually is easier for students. Just look at the picture and not at the congruent statement. However, if you look at example 2, there is no picture. So now you're going to have to go by the congruent statement. Again, this thing right here that I'm boxing in red is called the congruent statement. And the order they wrote the letters in is meaningful. It means they're telling you how the parts match up. So it's asking you, angle Y is congruent to which other angle? Angle Y is in that middle position or that second position. Again, if you want to number them, we've got an X, a Y, then a Z, and on the other side we have an M, an N, and an L. So angle Y is the second position, and so is angle N, so they match up. So we're going to say they're congruent to each other. They're also asking about angle M. Angle M is in the first position, and so is angle X. So those match up. And then they're asking you about some sides. So they said ML. M and L are in the first and third position. So go over to the other triangle. X and Z are in the first and third position. And then finally YZ. Y, Z are in the second and third position, and N and L are in the second and third position. So we're going to put N, L on the other side. All right, so you don't need the picture. You can go by the congruence statement, and the order they wrote the letters in is very meaningful. It's telling you which part matches up to which part. All right, in the last example, we're going to solve for some missing variables. And so the first one says, well, let's read the given first. It's telling you triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. Again, the order that they wrote those letters is important. So if we look at 3A, find the value of X. And so I'm going over to that picture and I'm looking for X. Here it is, right? There's X. It is labeling side AB. Remember that if it's on the outside of the triangle, it's a side. If it's on the inside of the triangle with a little degree symbol, then it's an angle. So 2x minus 2 is what side AB matches up to, right? AB is 2x minus 2. Well, what does AB equal to? Go to your congruence statement and you'll see that A and B are in the first two positions. If you go to the other triangle, so are D and E. So if we go find DE and see what number's on it, it's a 6. And so these two matches up to DE. These two match up. So 2x minus 2 is equal to 6. All right, we really couldn't do that unless we knew which part to look for, right? We're supposed to look for the correct part using the congruence statement. So if we solve this equation, we're going to add 2 to both sides. We're going to get 2x equals 8. Then we're going to divide by 2. We'll get x is 4. So think about if you plugged 4 in for 2 times 4 minus 2. You better get 6, right? We said it was supposed to be equal to 6. So that gives you 8 minus 2, which is equal to 6. So it checks out. All right, let's do the same thing with example 3b. It says find the measure of angle F. So if I look back at my congruence statement, angle F is in the third position and angle C is in the third position. So I know angle F is going to be equal to angle C. And so if I go to the picture and I look at angle F, I don't actually see anything. And if I go and look at angle C, I don't see anything either. So that seems weird. Why on earth do I want to set nothing equal to nothing? If we think about the last section, or well, actually one of the first sections we did in chapter 4, we know how to find the missing angle C, right? If this is 90 degrees and the angle B is 50 degrees, remember that triangles add to 180. So if we do 180 minus 90 minus 53, we are going to get 37 degrees. So now I know that angle C is 37 degrees, which means angle F would be 37 degrees. So angle F is going to equal 37 degrees. So that took a little bit of work, but it also took you remembering that triangles always add to 180 on the inside. So if you do a statement where you don't know anything, you can't plug anything in, then look at your picture and figure out, is there something you could calculate using what you do know from the picture? All right, I think that's the last one I gave. Yeah, that's the last one. All right, so this is all about congruence statements and understanding that the order of the letters matters.